Have you ever waken up and realized that the fire you once had is just gone? The things that used to keep you going, your job, your goals, your routines, now feel heavy, meaningless, or even boring. You try to force yourself to care, but no matter how much discipline you summon, the spark doesn't return. At first, you might think you're losing your edge. You label yourself lazy, unmotivated, maybe even broken. But the truth is, nothing is wrong with you. What's happening is far deeper. That missing motivation is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your old self is dying. From the moment we're born, we're told who we should be. Society, family, school, even social media, all of them hand us a script to follow. Work harder, do more, achieve, impress. Become the version of yourself that earns love and approval. For years, you probably wore that mask well. Maybe you were the overachiever, the reliable one, the person who always had it together. And for a while, that role worked. It got you results. It gave you praise. It made you feel safe. But here's what no one tells you. Eventually, the mask grows too heavy. Eventually, the role stops fitting. What once motivated you starts to feel like pressure, and what once felt like progress begins to feel like a prison. That's when the fire goes out. Not because you failed, but because the false self you've been performing is burning away. The exhaustion you feel isn't laziness. It's your soul saying, enough. You're not broken. You're breaking free. And while that freedom feels disorienting at first, it's also the very beginning of transformation. Because when the old self collapses, it makes room for the real you to step forward. The question is, how did this old identity form, and why does letting go of it feel so hard? That's where we go next. From the earliest moments of your life, you were being shaped. Every smile you earned, every frown you feared, every rule you absorbed quietly taught you who to be. Parents wanted you to behave a certain way. Teachers rewarded the student who followed the rules. Society admired the achiever, the one who pushed harder, the one who kept going no matter what. Without realizing it, you started building a version of yourself designed to win approval. Maybe you became the hard worker who never slowed down. Maybe you became the fixer, always solving other people's problems, or the people pleaser, bending and stretching yourself thin just to keep the peace. These roles worked for a time. They got you praise, recognition, maybe even success. And in those moments, it felt good, like you had finally found the formula for being accepted. But beneath it all, something else was happening. Each time you played the role, each time you put on the mask, the gap between who you really are and who you were pretending to be grew wider. You might not have noticed at first because the world kept cheering you on, but your soul noticed. Deep down, you always knew the applause wasn't for your true self. It was for the act. That's why the fatigue has set in. That's why your motivation has drained away. It's not because you're lazy. It's because your spirit is tired of pretending. Living as a character instead of your true self takes more energy than you realize. And eventually, the energy runs out. The mask becomes unbearable. The shoes that once carried you forward now pinch with every step. This is the moment where many people panic, because when the mask begins to slip, it feels like your whole identity is falling apart. And in a way, it is. But this collapse is not a failure. It's the beginning of something sacred. Because only when the false self dissolves can the true self finally breathe. And as this process unfolds, you're left standing in a strange and uncomfortable place. A space that feels empty, like a void. That's the stage we'll explore next. When the false self begins to crumble, it rarely feels gentle. It feels like your whole life is falling apart. The routines you once followed feel meaningless. The goals you used to chase lose their shine. Even the relationships that once seemed so solid can start to feel hollow. This collapse shakes you to the core, because it's not just behaviors or habits that are disappearing. It feels like you are disappearing. That's why so many people mistake this stage for laziness, depression, or failure. They say, "I can't focus anymore. I don't care the way I used to. Something must be wrong with me." But nothing is wrong. What's really happening is the death of the old self. The identity you built to survive has reached its limit, and your soul is demanding a new way forward. In order for that to happen, the old identity must dissolve. But when it dissolves, it leaves behind something most of us are never taught how to handle: emptiness, a void, the in-between space where the old is gone, but the new hasn't fully arrived. And that void feels terrifying. We're conditioned to avoid silence, to fill every gap with noise, productivity, or distraction. So when life hands us this empty space, our instinct is to panic. We try to force the old spark back, but it doesn't come. We try to run from the silence, but the silence stays. Here's the truth. That void is not a punishment. It's a pause. It's the sacred womb where rebirth begins. Just like a seed must rest underground before breaking into the light, your soul is resting in the unknown before it can grow into its next form. And though it feels dark, it is full of hidden potential. Of course, sitting in that void isn't easy. It asks you to face questions you've avoided your whole life. Who am I without achievements? Who am I without the roles I've been playing? Who am I when I'm not performing for anyone? Those questions can feel heavy, but they're not here to destroy you. They're here to guide you closer to the truth of who you are. And when you stop fighting the silence long enough to hear those questions clearly, something powerful begins to stir. A subtle shift, a quiet invitation, a glimpse of the real you beneath it all. That shift is where the deeper transformation truly begins, and that's what we'll step into next. As you begin to sit in that strange silence, you start to notice something you may have ignored for years: the difference between who you really are and who you were taught to be. At first, it comes as small realizations: a thought that no longer feels true, a habit that suddenly feels forced, a role that no longer fits. It's disorienting, because for so long those patterns were second nature. But now, the more you pay attention, the more you realize they were never truly yours. This is where the process of unlearning begins. You start stripping away the layers of conditioning. The voices of parents, teachers, and society that once directed your every move begin to fade. What remains is something raw and unfamiliar: your own voice. It speaks softly at first, almost drowned out by the noise of the ego. But with time, it grows clearer, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Of course, this stage doesn't come without grief. You grieve the version of yourself that once seemed confident, the identity that gave you direction, even if it wasn't aligned with your soul. You grieve the life you thought you wanted, the dreams you chased, the masks you wore so well. That grief is sacred. It is the funeral of the false self, and underneath it lies freedom. Freedom to rest when your body asks. Freedom to say no when something doesn't resonate. Freedom to stop forcing and start listening. It's in this space that you begin to taste a different kind of motivation. Not the push that comes from fear or pressure, but a gentle pull that comes from within. A calling, a flow, a way of moving through life that feels natural instead of forced. This inner shift is subtle but profound. You may find yourself less interested in chasing approval and more interested in peace, less interested in endless achievement and more interested in alignment. This is the turning point where your energy begins to recalibrate. You are no longer running on the fuel of fear. You are learning to be moved by truth. But to step fully into this new way of living, you must allow the old fire to burn out completely. And that means letting go of the desperate search for your old self and opening up to what comes next. That opening is what we'll explore now. The hardest part of this journey is letting the old fire die without rushing to replace it. For so long, your drive was fueled by fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of failure, fear of losing approval. That kind of motivation works for a while, but it burns like caffeine. A quick surge followed by a hard crash. Awakening strips you of that fuel so you can discover something better. But in the in-between, it feels like you have nothing left to stand on. This is when the emptiness feels the loudest. You look at your job, your goals, even your relationships, and wonder why they no longer excite you. The truth is, they weren't built for the real you. They were built for the mask. And once the mask begins to fall, everything connected to it starts to lose its hold. That loss is painful. It feels like your whole life is dissolving. But what's really happening is that space is being cleared. Think of it as clearing a room that's been cluttered for years. At first, it looks chaotic. Dust everywhere, piles of things scattered across the floor. But that mess is the first step toward creating space for something new. Your soul is doing the same thing. It's asking you to release what no longer belongs so that a truer, freer life can take shape. Yes, it will feel like a void. Yes, it will feel uncomfortable. But in that emptiness, seeds are quietly being planted. You may begin to notice small sparks, a book that speaks to your soul, a conversation that lights something inside, a walk in nature that feels like medicine. These are not accidents. They are whispers of your new self taking root. This stage is not about rushing to rebuild. It's about learning to sit in the pause without panic. To trust that just because the old no longer works, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're being redirected. It means you're preparing for a different kind of fuel. The kind that doesn't need force or pressure, because it rises naturally from your soul. And when you stop trying to force the old spark to return, you create space for that deeper fire to emerge. A fire that doesn't burn you out, but carries you forward with ease. That's the shift waiting on the other side of surrender, and it's what we'll move into next. As you release the old ways of pushing and forcing, you begin to notice something different rising in its place. Instead of the frantic energy that once drove you, there's a quieter pull, a deeper rhythm. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It simply nudges you toward what feels alive. This is the moment when action begins to flow from alignment rather than fear. Your choices are no longer about proving something to the world. They are about honoring what feels true inside. You may notice that your body craves different things. Less caffeine, less rushing, less endless to-do lists. More rest, more stillness, more space to breathe. You may notice that your energy naturally withdraws from people or environments that feel fake, draining, or heavy. And at the same time, you feel drawn toward places and people that feel calm, authentic, and nourishing. This isn't laziness, it's wisdom. Your soul is learning to protect what fuels it instead of wasting energy on what depletes it. The shift can be subtle. One day you realize you're no longer desperate for validation. You don't need the same applause or recognition to feel worthy. You stop measuring your life by how busy you are and start measuring it by how present you feel. Your goals begin to change. They no longer come from insecurity, but from inspiration. Instead of chasing, you start creating. Instead of forcing, you start flowing. Of course, this transition isn't always smooth. There will be days when you miss the old fire, even if it burned you out. There will be moments when you wish you could go back to the simpler comfort of chasing approval, because at least it felt familiar. But the more you surrender to this new rhythm, the more you see that what's coming is far more sustainable than anything you left behind. This is the essence of rebirth, Not a loud explosion, but a gentle unfolding. A new self emerging quietly, carrying wisdom, softness, and strength. And as this rebirth deepens, you begin to understand the truth. You never lost yourself. You were simply shedding what was false to make room for what was real. And that truth is what we'll close with next. If you're in that strange space right now, no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming, I want you to hear this. You are exactly where you need to be. The fatigue, the emptiness, the lack of motivation, the grief for your old self, none of it is failure. It is transformation. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are shedding the weight of an identity that never truly belonged to you, so that your soul can finally breathe free. Yes, it feels uncomfortable. Yes, it feels uncertain. But remember this. The caterpillar doesn't look like it's thriving when it's sealed inside the cocoon. From the outside, it looks still, even lifeless. Yet inside, every cell is rearranging to prepare for flight. That is what's happening in you now. What feels like collapse is simply the quiet work of rebirth. Soon, the spark you thought you lost will return. Not the frantic spark of proving, hustling, or performing, but a steady inner flame. A flame that guides instead of pressures, that inspires instead of drains. It won't demand that you force yourself through life. It will carry you naturally, like a river carrying a leaf. That's the gift of awakening, the shift from pushing through life to being carried by truth. So breathe, rest. Let the silence stay a little longer. Trust the process, even when it doesn't make sense. The old self is dissolving, and that's not something to fear. That's something to honor. Because the life that awaits you is lighter, freer, more real than anything you've lived before. If this message spoke to you, then let it be a reminder that you're not alone on this path. There are countless others walking through the same unraveling, finding their way back to who they truly are. Share your experience in the comments below so others can feel seen too. And if you want more guidance on this journey of awakening, make sure to subscribe and stay connected. Together, we can walk this path of transformation, one breath, one step, one truth at a time.